Hi, everyone. Welcome to the stream. So, I've been paying attention to what's going on in Los Angeles, and it's it is kind of fascinating. Um, Look, we've had a long history of rioting in the United States. We've had really destructive urban riots that kill dozens of people, that cause hundreds of millions, or in a few cases, billions of dollars in damages. They're never by immigrants, or even people motivated by uh, immigrant causes. They are not practically, they're literally always urban riots. They focus on confrontations with the police, or generalized black racial grievances. And this is what happened in 2020 was the last large flare up, although there were other flare ups in decades before, in the late 1960s, and also in the early 1990s. Urban riots are a kind of regular part of American life. Just like crime, just like we have a very high crime rate, that's also a regular part of American life that sets us apart from the rest of the developed world. Now, the American conservative movement, MAGA, have made immigration their main issue, have made the narrative that foreigners are harming Americans on every dimension, basically. They're all explanatory. Theory for everything in the world has gone wrong. My favorite of these is when they asked J.D. Vance about housing, and he says, well, we have illegal immigrants who are competing from housing. So, you can ask him, why did it rain today? And he would have an answer based on foreigners. You can ask, why are these towns doing poorly? Oh, because foreigners took their jobs. Not like the J.D. Vance of 12 or 15 years ago, who wrote in his book Hillbilly Elegy that basically these people were lazy and they wouldn't take responsibility for their lives, and they basically scapegoated others. Now, J.D. Vance has become one of those politicians he used to complain about. And so, they've just been desperately trying to force this narrative into everything that they do. And so you have the Trump campaign in 2024 runs on the idea of American carnage, that immigrants are making our cities less safe. This is just complete nonsense. I mean, it's not backed up by any empirical data. And, it was amazing. Part of the Yarvin, if you want like the quote unquote intellectual side of this, in the Yarvin profile in the New Yorker, where he cries multiple times in the piece, but this time one of the times he cries about his children being like shot, I guess, because they're going to live in a non-white America. Just complete fantasy. There's this book called Camp of the Saints, which was written by a Frenchman. It's about immigrants come to the West and everything basically falls apart. I never read it, but it's kind of a classic of like the reactionary and white nationalist crowd, and they so desperately want Camp of the Saints to be true. Um, in Europe, it's interesting. I mean, there is a demographic revolution going on, and the Muslim issue is a significant issue. But in America, it's a complete fantasy. So you think about these people who want to imagine that there's all this crime and all this disorder resulting from immigration. Reality does not support them. Reality does not provide much evidence for their belief, and so they come into office and they still want this, right? They still want this idea. They're really attached to this, and so that's where this is the context in which we should understand these Los Angeles riots, and I think it's an exaggeration to call them. Might be an exaggeration to call them riots. I mean, there's just very little. There's a couple of cars, Waymos, not even cars with people in them, were Waymos, and it's kind of interesting why these anarchist types really hate the driverless cars. You could have a complex psychological theory of um, them being against technological progress. I think that would be making it too complicated. I actually think it's just because they can't defend themselves. It's just kind of seems like fun to destroy something technological and developed. Maybe there's some kind of psychological thing behind that, but I think it's just fun. I think we shouldn't overly psychologize this. There was some looting of a few stores. nobody died. As far as I see, nobody's gone to the hospital. There's been no real injuries. It is completely, just because LA is a safe place. LA is a safe place because of immigrants, because immigrants displace the population that would riot um, every few years or every decade or so throughout most of the time since the 1960s. And Compton, right? Even Compton, it's Compton. There's been demographic replacement in Compton, and so Compton has had some unrest during all this, but not nearly as much as Compton back in the day. In the history of Compton, this is a very small disturbance, and so they keep escalating. They keep escalating. Like you get the sense they desperately want some kind of confrontation, and they just can't get it. There's just not much there because the Hispanic population in Los Angeles is not particularly violent. It's not particularly rowdy. The people here do not suffer from the effects of mass immigration. There's no public opinion that wants immigrants all gone. Even at even in red states, even at Texas, like as the state level, it's kind of been a national thing. The Greg Abbott just recently got rid of in-state tuition for illegal immigrants, which had been on the books for 20 something years in Texas, and nobody had ever complained about it. And there's just very few kind of. And this is why they have to go to like Home Depot. I mean, it's like you don't have enough people in jails. You don't have people that you're picking up for committing crimes that you could send back. You have to go where they actually look for work. You have to go to the workplaces. I mean, that's just very symbolic of like this is not this reality of immigration is nothing close to what the nativists want to believe is true and what they believe is happening in the world. Um, and so yeah, this this things I don't expect these riots to escalate all that much. Despite the Trump administration sending in Marines, it's kind of fun. Like, oh, National Guard. Now here's some Marines. Like they really want. Like, it's going to require the top. It's going to require the top of the line, kind of the American military, because it's that dangerous. Bannon. I should write a whole article on Bannon. I mean, there's nobody who just exemplifies like what's wrong with the world as much as Bannon does, because it's not even, he's not even racist. Like that would like take some courage. He gets away with like being like a fascist, but because he's like not racist at all and like anti-racist, so he'll say like, "Oh, we need to lock up all our enemies, and Trump should run a third term, and Trump should basically be dictator, and we're going to help blacks and Hispanics, right? And we're going to get rid of all the foreigners." So it's like this combination of like PC plus like fascism. It's just like the most horrifying combination of of attitudes and ideas possible. It's kind of ideally suited to like he sits down. If he was like racist, like it would be hard for him to sit down, or like even like quasi arguably racist or sexist. It would be hard for him to like sit down with the mainstream media. But like because we're still, even though we're not in cancel culture at the extremes of cancel culture anymore, the fact that we are, we're still at a point where being racist, being openly sexist is worse than actual fascism. And I think I think he is a fascist. I mean, it's basically get behind the leader, whatever the leader says. We have to lock up our enemies. It's intellectually hollow, but fascism often is intellectually hollow. It is kind of this just id of like these mean-spirited, angry, not very intelligent people, and Bannon does a good job of channeling that. But anyways, I brought up Bannon because he's talking about World War III, right? Just like an extreme case of someone just being out of his mind, regarding what is going on, and trying to create a reality that just does not match with what's actually happening in the world. Now, that said, it's kind of like as stupid and as like illogical all of this is. Regarding public opinion, it has been working. So let me see what Trump's actual approval rating is. Nate Silver, Trump approval. He's got this page that he brought over from. Okay, so Trump's approval has gone up from the tariffs. So the tariff, when it was the Liberation Day tariffs, like this, you could look at it from the bottom out. So it was like 43.6. Now he's at 46.8. It's stabilized. I mean, this as approval is basically what it was before or maybe a little bit more than the tariff the when he started doing the tariffs, and he's backed off a little bit on the tariffs. They've been stuck in the courts going back and forth, and so like mobilizing the masses for like a war where it's like Trump is doing stuff and Trump is kind of winning on this issue, and the fact that immigrants are not fighting back. People sometimes say, "Oh well, if these if these Hispanic immigrants, like or whoever these protesters are, if they are actually if they fight back and they become violent, that's going to help Trump." I don't know. It just seems like kind of the entire left is kind of low energy. During BLM, the riots kind of helped. They made BLM popular. I don't buy that. I don't buy this narrative. I mean, like the fact that he can create this entire like he's like got a guy who can basically fight. He can fight these battles in which he always wins because it's not a real battle because he's fighting a fantasy, which is immigrant violence. And then he gets to just keep racking up W's because there's nothing. These people are just going to go back to their countries. They're just doing work, and then he gets to play the bully, and there's nothing. There's nothing. Uh, there's no kind of interruption in this process. He gets to kind of stage manage this whole thing, and like this is kind of perfect. It's like the LA riot. The LA like people think if you're not fighting back, it's kind of the idea is that if you're not fighting back, you're kind of in the wrong, or you're just losing, or you're weak. I do believe that. So I do think that the fact that there isn't kind of more unrest is good for Trump. He can say, it's all because of me. Low confidence in all of this. I'm kind of yeah. I don't. I know there's David Shore research that purports to show that violent protests harm a cause and peaceful protests help it. I don't. This kind of methodology is always been suspect to me, and so I don't know. I don't know how much to trust that. Okay. Um, and the kind of public opinion. I've been thinking about recently how much public opinion has kind of shifted on this issue. And there was this recent Harry Enton was on CNN basically talking about in who do you trust more in immigration? In 2020, it was Democrats plus 32. Now it's this is just immigrant voters. So immigrants, people who are immigrants, who are voters, so they're citizens. In 2020, they were plus 32 towards the Democrats. Now they're plus 8 towards Republicans on trust of immigration. Net favorability on immigrants here illegally. Again, these are immigrants who are voters, plus 23 in 2020, minus 6 in 2024. They went from 36% voting for Trump in 2016 to 47% in 2024. And so like there's been a big shift in immigrant opinion. And you have to wonder this is kind of, people I think need to sit back and think about how odd this is. Like if you said 10 years ago, if you said 10 or 15 years ago, Republicans were going to become this hardcore anti-immigration, like being anti-foreigner was going to be the center of everything they do in politics. I mean, there's nothing to Vance or Trumpism. There really is nothing there except anti-woke and hostility towards foreigners, hostility towards immigration, hostility towards everything else is kind of negotiable, right? Foreign policy, you can negotiate with Iran, you might bomb Iran. On science, the tech guys, they get some of what they want, but sometimes like Trump is hostile to the tech industry. It's just basically it's these identity issues that are the core of Trumpism. And if you told people that this would be like all Republicans are about in 2025, but immigrants were kind of had gone from like overwhelmingly pro-Democrat to split between Republicans and Democrats and trusted Republicans more on the immigration issue, you would have thought, my God, this is crazy. Like, how could this have been the case? Um, and I think that what's going on here, like why, like I think anyone would have predicted, okay, Republicans go hard against immigration. Immigrants are going to become more